Hello everyone, welcome to FilmHead, where you will get all kinds of information about newly released movie on internet, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, or any other OTT platform or in theater worldwide. Let's start our today's topic. Number 1. No Way Up. The concept of No Way Up is intriguing and appears to be a fresh spin on the horror subgenre of shark attacks. Sadly, this thriller sinks rather than floats more often. The film opens with a parody of Final Destination, and it is a very well-executed bloody scene. No Way Up follows Ava, the daughter of a billionaire who is about to embark on a trip to Mexico with her boyfriend Jed, his buddy Kyle, and Ava's bodyguard Brandon. Unfortunately, the group's plane crashes into the ocean. While Ava and her party miraculously survive the crash, everyone still breathing in the plane's wreckage find themselves fighting for their lives against sharks who are hungrily trying to turn the plane into an all-they-can-eat smorgasbord. No Way Up starts off strong, but the film soon offers little surprises and originality, making it passable at best. Fans of shark attack thrillers will find No Way Up a satisfying addition to this legacy, but it doesn't exactly push the boat out. The film maintains a gripping pace, with the climax between Ava and the shark being a standout moment. No Way Up falls short in its emotional storytelling, a critical element seen in other disaster and survival thrillers. Aside from its lack of emotional depth, No Way Up also falters in its plot development. One survivor happens to be the governor's daughter, a potentially fascinating subplot that could have worked in favor of the story, particularly in the underwater rescue efforts. But this aspect, too, feels underdeveloped and fails to hold your attention. The unlucky 7 survivors huddle in the back of a flooding plane that is quickly sinking into the abyss. To make matters worse, while the final 7 are hanging out by the trays of snacks and refreshments, they also must fend off the threat of sharks trying their darndest to make our characters into snacks of their own. The film's concept is intriguing, but ultimately it is not well executed. Despite some early promise, it is obvious that there was potential for a far more impactful plot, which will probably leave viewers feeling let down. You have to wonder if this is what screenwriter Andy Mason meant, or if producer intervention and those annoying, stressful rewrites had a hand in it. It just seems odd that a movie with a clever concept like this one was meant to be presented absolutely serious from the start, devoid of any humor. Number 2. The Boogeyman. Extrapolated from a small Stephen King short story from the 1970s, The Boogeyman might make sense to viewers who do not have access to adequate illumination or working windows. For the rest of us, however, this nearly incomprehensible film necessitates such a complete suspension of disbelief that its few frightening moments barely register. The plot and conclusion are as hazy as the backdrop. Painted in the broadest of strokes, the story introduces the psychiatrist Will Harper, his teenage daughter, Sadie, and her younger sister, Sawyer. The recent death of their mother is causing Sadie to struggle at school and Sawyer to suffer night terrors. Will, unable to process his loss, has simply withdrawn, until a haggard stranger walks into his office and claims a supernatural entity slaughtered his 3 children. And, oh yes, he might have brought it with him. Unexpressed grief is fertile ground for all manner of ghouls and goblins, but the Boogeyman, despite a promisingly skin-crawling opening, barely rakes the topsoil. Horrible events accumulate, inchoate images whoosh past, black webbing sprouts on walls and ceilings. When a stranger enters their home and kills himself, a new form of darkness descends, one that seems to feed off their pain. The evil that attaches itself to the family is handled with as little detail and distinctiveness as the grief that attracts it, both painted in the broadest of strokes. The specifics of the creature and how it operates are just too derivative for the film to ever truly escape from the shadows, predictably recycling beat after beat, almost as if it were one long game of guessing which element came from which film before it. There are some good moments in there, largely because Savage frames situations in a way that makes them seem different from what we have seen before. His persistence on upending our visual expectations often pays off handsomely in a picture that otherwise consists of repetitive set pieces dealing with light and shadow. However, I am not sure if anything comes near to the level of nightmare the film aims to provoke. Savage's talented group of performers enhances his sense of atmosphere. Outside of Savage's visual verve, there's really little else to The Boogeyman. Its attempt to use its central villain as a metaphor for emotional trauma never working quite as well as it did in last year's Smile. It ultimately works best as further proof of his ability as a genre filmmaker, sleekly gliding from a laptop to the big screen. Better things to surely come. Number 3. The Piper. The majority of you are probably familiar with the tale of the Pied Piper, which tells how the people of Hamelin hired a traveling musician in 1248 with the promise that he would remove their rodent problem. When they broke their word, he took their children instead of the money they were supposed to pay. Piper is aimed squarely at a teenage audience and possesses a certain cringe factor for older viewers. But that's not to say that every film is obliged to suit everyone's tastes. This one is part supernatural horror and part romance, as Amy quickly becomes involved with a young man called Luca who approaches her in the street with a magic trick. Kim Woo-ryong, a flute player with a crippled leg, lost his wife during the Korean War, which left most people destitute. To find a cure for his son Young-nam, who is suffering from tuberculosis, he takes the boy on a journey on foot to Seoul, where he believes that Dr. MacArthur can work wonders with American medicine. Woo-ryong discovers that the hamlet is overrun with extremely aggressive rats, who seem to have developed a desire for human flesh as a result of an incident that the villagers refuse to discuss. Most of the grisly activities of the rats are implied, creating an atmosphere of uncanny fear. In return for Young-nam's medical expenses, Woo-ryong offers to use his music to drive out the plague. The next action sequence is exhilaratingly fast-paced, including colorful visuals of rats in a stampede. The chief's manipulation of the villagers' cowardice and selfishness reaches nasty new heights with a witch hunt that closely resembles a self-criticism session during the Cultural Revolution. It opens with the voice of Gustafsson on the phone trying to talk Catherine out of destroying the last copy of her concerto for children. She tells him it is evil, no one must ever know about it, before rushing outside to try and burn it in her fire pit. But something with glowing eyes intervenes, and she burns while the manuscript survives. The opening sequences of the Piper's first act, which are set against the backdrop of an impending thunderstorm, are masterfully eerie thanks to Thoroddsen's direction. The chambers with broken mirrors are made even more eerie and mysterious by the red lighting used in the scenes as Mel searches the estate for the manuscript. The film does rally in the final act with a wonderfully bloody scene of the Piper clawing its way out of the body of the orchestra's slimy flautist in a scene reminiscent of several 80s genre films including Demons and the Sword and the Sorcerer. Sands, by the way, delivers one of the film's best moments with his response to seeing this. Number 4. The Exorcist Believer. Photographer Victor Fielding is on his honeymoon in Haiti with his expectant wife Seren, who was blessed by a voodoo practitioner, when a powerful earthquake strikes. The paramedics inform Victor that Seren is critically hurt and that he must decide between saving his wife and their kid. 13 years later, Victor has lost faith in God since Seren's death and raises his daughter Angela by himself in Georgia. One day after school, Angela ventures into the woods with her Baptist best friend Catherine West to perform a seance, attempting to contact Angela's mother. The girls go missing and a 3-day manhunt ensues. The girls' circumstances get worse. After learning about Anne's past as a potential nun in the novitiate and her covert abortion, Anne becomes sure that Angela is possessed. To prove her point, Anne sends Victor a biography penned by Chris McNeil, who went through a similar experience with her daughter Reagan in 1973. Chris is well known throughout the world for her studies on exorcisms, having dedicated her life to studying them in all cultures. The success of her memoir caused Reagan to grow apart from her mother, and she has not seen her since. It's evident that director David Gordon Green is a devoted fan of the classic, as he meticulously recreates scenes that evoke memories of The Exorcist. Just as the original began in northern Iraq, Believer is set in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Similarly, just as Father Damien was seen punching a bag in a gym in the classic film, we witness Leslie Odom Jr. doing the same here. The abundance of references to The Exorcist is undeniable. The girls are tied to chairs as the group proceeds with the exorcism, and uses a crucifix with the St. Benedict medal engraved on it to battle the demon. The demon reveals that Victor did not choose to keep Angela alive 13 years ago. He chose Seren, but she died from her injuries. As Anne reads from the biblical text of Ezekiel 16 while holy water is poured on the children, the demon begins to shriek. Even after 50 years, it remains exceedingly challenging for films to surpass the magic of The Exorcist, which earned 10 Oscar nominations. In 1973, it emerged as something truly original and a breath of fresh air. However, during the climax, when Victor assembles a group of people for the exorcism ritual, it feels rushed and lacks both scariness and innovation. Number 5. Walk to Maghreb. Adi, Salman and Ayu live in Jatajajar, a remote village in central Java. Having to help their family in the fields, Adi and Salman are often late for school. As a result, they are often punished by Mrs. Worrell, their strict teacher. One day, Adi and Saman's resentment towards Mrs. Wuro reaches a peak. They scold her and even hope that the teacher will die. This oath is pronounced at the same time as a Maghrib prayer. Not long after, Mrs. Wuro tragically dies. Since then, Adi and Saman experience a terrifying supernatural terror. You shall not leave our cattle or our children from sunset until evening. At that time the devil comes, because this movie shows that something can happen to you even after sunset. The movie begins with an incident that happened 30 years ago in a small village in Indonesia, which ties in with the tragedies of the entire movie. The people of the village, the surrounding environment, the weather will give you a sense of dread. All in all, every character in the movie and their performance was amazing. This is one of the best horror movies I have ever seen. Some of the scenes in this movie will shock you a few times, which I am thrilled to see. First of all, those who are used to watching a lot of horror movies will not be afraid of the movie, but I can't help but appreciate the cinematography of the movie. The location, color grading, background music, in one word, is amazing. The rural side of Indonesia is beautifully portrayed, but the story is less horror than thriller. Now coming to who will like this movie, for those who are afraid of watching normal horror movies, this is a good choice. The film Maghrib Time presents a fresh horror story, adapted from a short film of the same title on the YouTube channel and boomed when the big screen film was broadcast. From the beginning to the middle of the story, the horror story is very palpable. Unfortunately, in the scenes towards the end of the film, the story starts to feel confusing. Some conflicts have not been resolved and have resulted in plot holes. Even though this horror film is for audiences aged 17 years and over, Maghrib Time players are dominated by players who are still children. Starting from Adi, played by Ali Fikri, Rani played by Nafisa Faisharani, and Saman played by Bima Sena. The longest film experience of the three artists, but their performance was very good and managed to steal the audience's attention throughout the film.